Ms. Sencer.
Thanks again for having me. I'm going to start on some of the points that haven't been talked about the statement of position.
Well, and good. That's a good segue, because I'd like everybody to be reminded that if we have multiple seatings on the same issue and a point has been made, it's not necessary to repeat it. It might be more valuable to go into stuff we hadn't heard about. Thank you.
I'm going to start with the proposal to include potential dates and times for the election on the statement of position. It is really frustrating when you go back to a bargaining unit and say, we have your direction and decision, we have your decision and direction of election, and now we'll start the negotiation process about when your election is actually going to be held. Identifying up front, not necessarily the actual dates, but days of the week and times based on shifts at the get-go eliminates one of the choke points later on in getting to an election in a timely manner, regardless of whether or not there is a hearing. I also say the same thing about the list by requiring the employer to disclose the classifications or job titles that are used by the employer. Frequently, we have a problem where we talk past each other. The employee identifies themselves as a technician. The employer identifies them as an associate. We say technicians are in. They say we have no technicians. We only have associates. And we might not actually have a disagreement, but we're using different language to talk about the same points. So simply having the classifications used by the employer would allow for the easier resolution of issues because everyone would know what they were talking about. And we hadn't really had a chance to talk to those two before. I'm going to go back to the ability of the statement of position to limit the issues that are going to be raised at hearing. It allows the union to tailor the witnesses that they want to bring forward. And we do recognize, the union side does recognize, that it can be a hardship on an employer when the union subpoenas the vast majority of employees in the facility. And I'm saying in the facility, not just the proposed bargaining unit. Because if I don't know in advance that the employer is going to limit their opposition or their proposals or their position to whatever it may be, I have to come prepared for everything. And yes, I said I can easily prepare. I've been doing this a while. I've been to a lot of our cases. I have a lot of support back in my office that makes sure that I have that information at my fingertips. But you do have to prepare. I'm over-preparing when I wind up having to prepare for positions that are not being taken by the employer. And we're over-preparing witnesses and taking more people out of the workforce, more people out of the employer's facility on a daily basis than need to, because we don't know what the positions that are going to be taken in advance. And I actually think that that's a lose-lose. It's an advantage for an employer for us to only pull out from their facility the employees who may actually have testimony relevant to the issue at hand. It would be less disruptive for both the union and the employer for everyone to be focused on the witnesses who actually have some information to provide on the matter. I'd like to also talk about how this dovetails into the idea of closing arguments, oral closing arguments, which I'm going to be on a panel about later. If there were a position statement in advance, for the employer it acts as an outline to their oral closing argument. For the union it acts as guideposts as to what they need to be prepared for in their oral closing argument. And that again allows for both sides to do preparation and be properly prepared to address those issues in particular. In a slightly similar kind of situation, I do a lot of arbitration as well, and under some contracts we only do oral closings. Both management and union have committed that in order to have the process resolved in a faster basis, they're only going to do oral closings. The step process of the grievance procedure allows both sides to come in prepared to how to argue the case in arbitration and then the closing brief. I see the statement of position as providing a similar analogous kind of information as the step process in the grievance procedure because it's putting all of those issues out there. They might not all be important, they might not all be raised, some of them might be resolved during hearing, but at least you have at the outset what the potential universe of issues are. And that goes to what my final point is. Last month I testified at a hearing about the NLRB's ambush election rules, as they like to call them. I think the current system creates its own kind of ambush, where the union is walking into a hearing where it does not know the issues that are going to be raised. And that's easily enough to resolve. And that may require some tweaking on the waiver or the date that the statement of position needs to be provided by. But having something is very helpful. And as email communication has increased, we've seen more of it in advance and has actually become less of an ambush situation, although it has not been eliminated. Board agents regularly contact me and opposing counsel asking about particular positions by email. Employer is committing in writing in advance of the hearing to particular positions via their email communications with the board agents, which the union is then copied on. And I think that's been helpful in trying to focus what a hearing is actually about and bring the parties closer together for stipulation. And anything that we can do to move that process along has value in this system. Thank you.
One quick follow-up. Obviously the witnesses aren't supposed to refer to each other too much, so I apologize for the nature of this question. But assuming that one might have some sympathy for the plight of the smaller employer who actually doesn't know about any of this stuff up front, what's your view on having some kind of variable deadline set that applies to those folks? I mean, for example, in board litigation, we have the Equal Access to Justice Act. So if there are small parties that essentially fall victim to our procedures and they win, then they can get reimbursement. What about some quasi-IAJA deadline variable proposal?
I haven't thought about that, but I did see in the proposed rules that there is the option of an employer getting assistance from the board in filling out the statement of position, the region in filling out the statement of position. I don't see any reason why we should limit that to the day of hearing and therefore eliminate that problem by giving them that access as early as they want it.
But the hearing officer is neutral and is not really going to be a zealous advocate for whatever the employer's position might be. You would agree with me on that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I would agree with you on that.
Okay.
This email process that you described, are the issues that are being, where petitions, are the emails, do they contain issues that are the ones that would be in the statement of position? Is that your experience?
Some of them, yeah. So sometimes it's as simple as, well, this is what we call those people. Sometimes it's, we're taking the position that this is a appropriate community with each other, but not with the one you're seeking to armor globe into. Sometimes it says, the email will say, well, we think that one of those people might be a supervisor. And so these email chains do, in fact, get to some of the information that's in the statement of position, but the use of email is dependent on which board agent is going to be processing the R cases in a particular region at any given time and the willingness of the other party to engage in that process.
But the employers are, in fact, taking positions before the hearing?
Yes, in some cases.
In writing.
Just following on that, what has been your position with respect to the employer backing out of that position once those emails have been sent?
They generally tend not to, mainly because then I make a big deal of it.
Okay.
Right, but I think that they're very careful in the positions that they take in email to the board, because the board, I think, the regions frown upon it also. When they then go into the hearing room, and frequently the person working the R cases is also serving as the hearing officer that day, although they might not be the reader of the record or the writer of the decision, they will ask them, is this position still hold? And most of the time I find that they do.
Okay.
And I just have a question. I want to compliment you on your analogy to the step process and grievance arbitration. And because, we have many companies and unions, nearly 80 years of history or more dealing with kind of a generally worded grievance that provides a roadmap for the parties in grievance handling and in arbitration. And so I'm not trying to lock you into this position, but if we were to adopt a written statement of position process that was flexible, similar to the role played by the written grievance in most, grievance arbitration situations, would you agree that that would provide, some reasonable measure of improvement over the present situation, in comparison to what we have now?
Yes, I would think that just about anything that has the parties put the position out there and get some of these general facts out there so everyone's playing from the same information would be an improvement over what we have now.
Okay, thank you.